Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Stories of Vermilion Oral History Series, presented by the Vermilion Area Archival Society in collaboration with the Vermilion History Museum and the Ritter Public Library. My name is Rich Tarrant. I am the curator of the Vermilion History Museum. The program is going to be videotaped, so please turn off your cell phones. The Archival Society, with others along the river, are planning a 50th anniversary remembrance on Sunday, July 7th, at the Vermilion Boat Club from 2 to 5, and on Monday from July 8th here at the library at 7 p.m. Everyone is welcome to attend both events. We're collecting stories of anyone who would like to share their experiences by video recording, email, or handwriting. Please contact Margaret Wakefield Worcester, who is here tonight in the pink shirt over there. Our guests tonight, with their memories of the flood while living on Riverside Drive, are Eileen Bullen, Frank Luca, Ed and Dolores Yepko, Judy Imars, and rescuer Bill Stanfield. So here they are. Take it away.
Thank you very much. Well, if you're familiar with Riverside Drive, it's a street off Vermilion Road. And in 1969, it was a street that had mostly cottages, I would say about 40 cottages, and a few year-round homes. And I was one of the lucky people that owned a year-round home on the 4th of July. But there was all kinds of activities going on that day because it was a holiday weekend. Everybody was partying and having a good time. And on Friday evening, the water started, which was the 4th, the water started to come up on the road. And we had some from my sister and brother-in-law and some friends of mine, Francie and George, were staying with us for the weekend. And George decided he had to leave, he had to go home. He couldn't stay because it was going to flood. And we all made fun of him because we said, no, it never floods in July, it's never going to flood. But they left that night and they went home. So in the morning, the water started to raise. We were wrong, it started to come up. And then eventually it started to get really high. And so a couple of the owners of the cottages came to our house because we lived on the second floor. We were higher, so we never thought the water would get higher than that. And then we watched the campers go down the river, and we watched the boats go down the river, and and the water kept rising. And Evelyn Zabel, who was one of our neighbors, she was at our house and she was getting scared, and so she started to pray the rosary. She was so scared, she said, I'm going to pray and they're going to come and rescue us. And so finally a boat came to our door, and she goes running to the door, and she sees the boat, and she says, I can't go in that boat, I need a big boat. And so they left. They went, probably it was you, probably went to rescue somebody else. So then we waited a little longer, then a little while later, a boat finally came, and they took the women and children, and we took, Zabel's had a son named Mark, and his gerbil. We took his gerbil too. So we had to leave our dog there, and the dog, the people who listened said he barked all night, but then they couldn't hear anything. But he floated on the bed for 3 days before we got back to him. He was okay, but he was never the same, I don't think. But he did live, yeah. But then I remember when we left, the water was so high we had to put our heads down to go under the electrical wires. I mean, the water had come up that quick. And they took us, in fact, you took us, to the bottom of the Nautical Drive Hill. And at that time, Valley Harbor was completely flooded. There was no place to go. So we walked to the top of the hill, and there was a woman at the top of the hill who was having a graduation party. And she opened her garage, and she had all kinds of picnic tables set up for everybody. So she let us go inside and sit there, and have some kind of place to go. And then after a while, someone came. I really don't even remember who, and they gave us a ride because the men were on the other side of the river where they took them. So we got a ride to, had to go down 113, but we made it over to Vermilion Road, and somehow or other, we all got together, and Evelyn, who was still with us, she had her sister come and drive us to her house. So we stayed at her house that night, I remember that, and the next morning my brother came and took myself, and we had one son who was a year old at the time. Rich and I went to my parents' house and stayed there. Dick, my husband, stayed at the house and thought he could try to clean up. It took a while before we could clean up at all, but we did clean up. But our house had over 3 feet of water in the upstairs in the second story of the house, so we lost everything. I have to say the Salvation Army was probably the most wonderful people for us. They came and they gave us vouchers for cleaning supplies and everything else. The Red Cross, on the other hand, came and they said, well, if you can come to Sandusky and fill out paperwork, we'll, we probably can help you. Well, of course, nobody had a car. But somehow or other we got a car and we went up there, but they wouldn't give us anything because, my husband worked, so they couldn't give us any money. So they weren't helpful at that time, so. But a lot of people did come forward. They gave us furniture. We had church groups come through that helped us clean up the walls in the basement, wash them. I mean, the house was a total disaster, literally, but people were great. Finally, somebody brought us a TV, because I remember this. Somebody brought me a crib mattress, and then somebody brought me a TV, and by the time I sat on the crib mattress and turned the TV on, Neil Armstrong was walking on the moon. I always remember that. And I thought, how could I have forgotten that was even going on? And then a lot happened after that. There's so many stories of the area, but that's my quick little story of what happened that day, and I'm going to turn it over to Dolores Yepko, who has another story.
Hello, my name is Dolores Yepko, and I have to read mine because I'm going to be 88 next month, so I can't do it myself. Thank you. Anyhow, I lived on Riverside Drive during the '69 flood, and now it is 2019, and I'm still living on Riverside Drive, a few doors down. Husbands have priorities, right? The day before July 4th, we had a family picnic. I went to bed while the others played poker. Then, when they finally quit and walked to their cars, the water was covering their shoes. That night, it was hard to sleep because the thunder and lightning was incessant. It was continually lightning and the constantly. It was a terrible, terrible night, and I've never, ever experienced the lightning and storm and the thunder one night. The next day, Ed and Frank Luca were standing in water below their knees and kept saying, it's going to crest. Then Marge and Frank Luca came to our cottage, and we had our small pram tied there, and we still have that pram. And Ed then rode each one of us next door to the neighbor's cottage because they had a second floor. The river was flowing fast, so Ed had to row the boat out, then in to the cottage next door. Before we did that, I remember standing on our back porch facing the river while the water kept rising. It was up to almost our waist, and our phone kept ringing, and I was afraid to answer it because of electricity or whatever. As we entered the house next door, I saw a large hutch floating on its back in their living room. Sorry, I have to go back to standing on our back porch. I watched a lot of stuff floating by, like picnic tables, campers, and so on and so on. When we went into Bob Buelen's house, the living room had about 4 feet of water in it. We went upstairs and continually watched the water out the window. We were in a bedroom that had rolls of carpet in it. I had my French poodle with us, and she pooped 2 little sausages on the rolled up carpet. I never apologized, sorry. I need to get this out of the way. There we go. By then, we came downstairs and had to put, this was when the boat came to pick us up, apparently. The boat came to pick us up, and we came downstairs and I had to put my head underwater to get to the boat because the door frame was under the water. The boat drove us across the river to West River Road. We sat on the lawn of someone's house. They also let us use their phone, and I called my sister to pick us up. They had a difficult time reaching us because many of the roads were washed out. Frank and Marge were with us and came with us to our home in Lorraine. They called their son Chaz to come pick them up and take them to their home in Cleveland. When we went back after water receded, the smell of the valley was very horrendous. As you were approaching the valley, the smell hit you. Everything in the valley was the same color. It was like someone spray painted the area muddy brown. The trees, cottages, ground, all exactly the same color. We lost our car, truck, boat, and cottage. 8 months later, we bought my nephew's place on Riverside Drive, and we now live on Riverside Drive there. Still.
Next, we're going to have Jody Imars tell her story.
Hi, I know it's hard to believe I was only 5.5 at the time, but it's like a video in my head. I remember everything that happened. I remember that night we had the flash flood come up, and my dad and my uncle Rich next door to us and a few other people, they were up in Canada on a fishing trip. So the whole time this was happening, they had no idea what was going on. We were at the cottage with my mom and my aunt, and my Uncle Gene was a couple doors down across the street. He was the only guy in our particular group that was still there. And I remember getting up the next morning, and the water had already gotten so high. He was a big guy, and he had a rope tied around him, and he was going to the cottages around us, bringing people over to our place, because we were one of the few places that was up high. And I don't remember everyone who came over, but I remember next door my Aunt Jean's father, Grandpa Tim, who was, I think, in his 80s at the time. They had a little car-top boat that they went from their cottage across to our cottage and brought him over to our place. And at the time, the porch was not closed in. It was just an open porch with crisscross rails. And we were all standing on the porch watching as the water kept rising, and we were counting as the water was coming up the steps. 8, 9, 10, and there's 13 steps, and it just kept coming, and it was so fast. We just couldn't get over where all this water was coming from. And at one point, I remember as we were standing at the railing, one of the foundation blocks had come out from under my aunt and uncle's cottage next door to us, and the corner of the cottage fell down. And I remember my cousin Barb screaming when that happened. And as the water kept coming up, my mom said, "Jody, let's grab everything out from under the lower cabinets and put it up on top of the kitchen countertops." And everybody laughed and said, "Oh, the water's never going to get that high." So we took all the cereal and the pots and pans and canned goods, everything out of the bottom cabinets, put it all on top of the countertops. We took the TV and stereo and put them up on top of the bunk beds. That was about the only thing that got saved, because the water ended up going up over the kitchen countertops, and this was in the second story. I don't know if it's true or not, but I was told the water was at 17 feet over flood level, was where they ended up counting it. I remember when the cottage, my aunt and uncle's cottage next door floated away, it ended up on the knoll and it blocked the road. So when they came down to work, they told my aunt, "You have to decide, either make arrangements to get this cottage moved out of the street or we have to destroy it." And my dad and my uncle were up in Canada yet, and she didn't know what to do, so she told them to go ahead and destroy it. And I remember the cars floating. When I looked around the other side, my aunt and uncle, Dick and Dorothy Sindelar, had the cottage on the other side of us, and they were on their boat, I believe in Cedar Point at the time, and they had a yellow station wagon, and there was a brick, really tall brick, double-sided grill that we shared, and it was between our cottages. And I remember as the water came up, their car started to float, and it banged into this grill. I mean, like I said, it's just like a video in my mind. I remember all these things, and people are like, "But you were only 5.5. How do you remember any of that?" I guess it's just because it's the type of thing that it is. It sticks with you. And I remember after the flood, everything was, like you were saying, everything was just mud. Everything was solid mud. And it was that silty, it dries almost like concrete. And I remember my mom got very sick because she didn't realize at the time you're not supposed to mix ammonia and bleach. And like Eileen said, for years we had Christmas in July parties, and we would take this kettle around and take donations, and we would write a check and send it to the Salvation Army every year to thank them for the help that they gave us, because it was so wonderful that they were there to help us when nobody else was. And I also remember on the news, Chagrin Falls had gotten flooded also, and I remember people talking about how Chagrin Falls was getting all the press and everything, and nobody knew anything about Vermilion or what had happened, and we kind of felt left out, you know, like we were the ugly stepchild or something. Nobody wanted to talk about what happened to us. But I remember when the water was at the last step before coming into the second level, about a 14 or 16 foot aluminum car-top boat came along, and they wanted to take the kids first, so my cousins and my brother and they said to get in the boat, and I still remember, because it was drilled into our heads, you don't get in a boat or near the river without a life vest on. Well, they didn't have any life jackets. And I remember turning my mom and going, I can't get in the boat, I don't have my life jacket, because they were downstairs in the basement, which was all flooded. And she said, just get in the boat, you'll be fine, these guys will take care of you. And they took us around across the street over to the hill going up to Vermilion Road. And I still remember the hill was so slippery, it was just solid mud. And the firemen had a rope down, and we were pulling ourselves up on the rope as the firemen were pushing us, helping us get up top. And the last thing that I remember of that day was when we got up top, this woman who lived in the house right up at the top where we came up, she felt sorry for us kids because she didn't know, you know, what was going on in our minds or how scared we were. And she disappeared, and about 10 minutes later she came out with this huge bowl full of candy and M&Ms and all, just anything she could do to try to make us feel like this is just any other day, just have some fun, don't worry, you're safe. And anyway, that's pretty much my story.
I'm Frank Luca. Frank and Marge were my parents that Dolores spoke earlier. Just for the record, I was not there on 4th of July flood. I recently graduated from Cleveland State in June, and with two of my classmates, we were in Put-in Bay. So we took the ferry over to Put-in Bay and came back on Saturday, not knowing. We started to go through Vermilion. I said, let's go to my parents' cottage. Well, we just got the river, or the Liberty Avenue was still open, and we were waiting in traffic, and you could see the trailers going like a traffic jam going downriver. We turned onto Vermilion Road and then stopped and looked there. I just saw the peak of my parents' cottage. And my dad's boat was fine. He put real long ropes on it, and it was actually floating above the trees. It was on the water, and it looked fine. But what happened when the water came down is the ropes got hung up and it got knocked sideways. So half of the inside of the boat was full of mud. And then a friend of his was a mechanic because mud came in the engine, and they flushed it out. He worked on it all day, and we used the boat the rest of the summer. If anybody remembers the rest of the summer of June of '69, it was a very nice summer after that. So what I'm going to read to you is my brother's story. My brother, Chaz Luca, his story. Right now, he lives in Morrow Plantation, Maine. He has a bed and breakfast up there, Katahdin Lodge. Anyway, I'm reading his story. On the night of Friday, July 4th, 1969, I was playing in a band at a local tavern in Cleveland, Ohio. Before cell phones and the internet, accurate news didn't travel like it does today. Unaware at the time of the extent of the disaster, I remember getting a phone call from someone the next morning that the Vermilion River Valley had flash flooded, extremely unusual for the summer, where my parents had been staying in their riverside cottage. I drove out there in my brand new '69 red Chevelle Malibu convertible to find them. I got to the top of the hill on Vermilion Road and looked down into the valley and saw only the top 2 or 3 feet of the peak of the roof of their riverside cottage was visible above the floodwaters. A lot of cars were parked along the road with people looking down at the fast-moving floodwaters. Someone there told me that all the people that had been down in the valley had been taken to a shelter in Vermilion. So I dove across the Liberty Avenue Bridge and into town. I arrived at the shelter. The Red Cross was there, but not my parents. After another phone call, I learned that they had actually been taken to a friend's home in Lorraine. That's Eddie and Dolores Yepko. Trying to drive back out of town, I found that they had closed Liberty Avenue Bridge, and I was on the wrong side of the river and needed to get back. So I started driving south to find a way to cross back over the river valley. I got as far south as the Gore Orphanage Road Bridge and decided to cross there. The raging floodwaters were going over the roadway and the deck of the bridge. I had no idea how deep that water was, but being a brave 19-year-old guy, I took my car and sent it across the valley. Only by the grace of God did my Chevelle and I make it to the other side. My adrenaline was pumping, and I was greeted in Lorraine by a policeman who pulled me over for going 70 in a 35 zone. That's Chevelle, a good performance. I told him I was trying to find my parents, but that didn't matter to him, so he wrote me a ticket anyway. I did find them safe and sound at Yepko's home in Lorraine. Their car, along with many others in the valley, had all been submerged. My dad had a 68 fire engine red Ford hardtop Mercury Park Lane. I had just blue coraled it for his birthday, which was in June. Oh well. My parents' cottage was spared, unlike many others that floated off their foundations. One was even blocking the roadway. That was Wykie's, your uncle's. Afterwards, we had to shovel river mud out of the front door of the cottage. Everything inside the cottage was trash, including my grandparents' antique Kimball player piano. And it made it all the way from Montana, but didn't make it through the Vermilion flood. There was a small hole in one of the kitchen windows, and the front half of the fish was looking into the kitchen. And the rear end was still sticking outside the window. We needed a little humor at that time. Later on, I drove back to the spot where I had driven through the floodwaters, only to find that the road was completely washed away. I knew I would have been the last car ever at that time to drive on that road. And my brother he did a lot of work on that piano, and after we came, I said the weather after that was very nice. He took we had about 100 piano rolls. He took them all outside, and the covers were all shot, and he was able to salvage them. I can give you a. This piano roll made it through the '69 flood. In fact, there's still remnants of a little bit of mud on each side. And he got them out, but the paper got a little wrinkled and they shrunk a little, but they still play fine. Anyway, that's my story. I'm sticking to it. Thank you.
I got conned into this. Well, I woke up early in the morning by my partner George, because the mayor had called. There was people needed rescued up in a campground, so we went up. We went up there first and got most of the people there. Then after a while, they were either gone or there was somebody got them. Then we went to Riverside Drive, and I don't remember everything we did. We took a lot of people out, and so a couple things stick in my mind. I know somebody, I have no idea names, was standing on I guess it was just, I found out later, he was standing on the steps of his home. And I asked if he needed help to get his wife out, and he said yes. Well, I didn't know he was standing there, so I jumped over the side of the boat. Thank God I didn't leave the side of the boat, because I went right in the water. But after that, when the water got so deep, it was up in the foliage of the trees, and we could hear people over at the boat club. You could hear them, but we couldn't see them. We'd have to work our way through the trees to get them. There was one fellow was holding on to a tree. He was scared. We had to pry his hands loose. And there was one other one, I don't know if it was a cottage or what, was up against the hill. And the police were up there, and they were trying to throw him a garden hose. But we also got him off. And I don't know how many were. We did get out. I didn't keep track, but it was terrible. I don't know what else to say. I didn't have anything to do with cleanup over there because we had enough to do on the other side of the river. Yeah.
That's it?
That's it.
Okay. We also have a slideshow that I hope Frank will help me and go through the slides. Where's the slides? Behind us. Yeah, you can stay, yeah. Okay, what is this?
That's my parents' cottage on the south side, and that's our former neighbor, Bill and Laverne Thompson's cottage. That was about maybe 300 feet upriver on the other side of the street. My dad always said, he goes, you know, buddy, he goes, if you want to get high enough, anything will float. So the cottages that were not bolted down pretty much went bye-bye. So anyway, luckily the water went down before it hit my parents' cottage. And that's the Kimball player piano that didn't make it. And we tried to move it, and it fell apart like, it just went. And that's the roll cabinet on the side. When my brother got those rolls out, it actually salvaged a number of them, which was amazing. That's the kitchen, obviously. It's a lot of mud. It's the shots of our cottage. And that's your uncle's 63 old Starfire convertible. It was a cream puff. I always remember that car. But, I don't know who the other cars are. I just remember Dick Weike's beautiful Starfire that hit the dust. That's my dad's 68 Mercury Park Lane. And there wasn't a, and it went through the floor, it was underwater. There wasn't a scratch on it, which some cars were all banged up. There wasn't a scratch on it, but it sure was muddy. That's the Army Corps of Engineers came in helping clean up. That's looking south from the turning circle. That's Eileen Buellen's in-laws, the second cottage. And that's one of the few full-time people, the cottage next to them, the house. That was Betty Majors, Jim and Betty Majors. They were full-time people there. And I think that's Eddie and Dolores's cottage aftermath. That's the other side of their cottage. That's the front of my parents' cottage. And it's funny, the trellis stayed there. It's amazing. And no windows were broken, other than that one fish trying to get in. None of those windows were broken. It's amazing. I don't know. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Bob, do you recognize? Because Bob Borgio's. Yeah.
Wow.
It's looking upriver from.
This, I believe, is the Valley Harbor Hill, I think. That looks like Nautical Drive.
Okay, yeah.
That's where we got off the boat. That's how the water was.
And a friend of ours, the very first house on Nautical Drive was Steve Brodek's house. I remember he wasn't there too long. He had there was water up to the countertops there. They just moved there. Yeah. I don't know either. I don't remember. Oh, okay. Right. Yeah, it was Betty Majors and then Hewlins. That's at the very end. That's the last cottage on Riverside, I believe. That's Debbie and Frank. Yes.
Looks like, yeah.
Yeah. A little bit of history there where Rom says that was I don't know if anybody remembers, that was an archery range for a while. Remember I won a raffle, I won 100 free arrows there. It was my only time I ever went there. That's Huggies, where the Texaco is.
Every car is a classic car.
Yeah. It's out in the lake, beached boats.
That's in Birmingham, Ohio. That's on Route 60 in Birmingham where the bridge washed out. Yeah, really. That's it. That's it, okay.
That's all, folks.
That's all, folks. Do you have any questions? I don't think so. I think the Norwalk. Oh, see, I don't know that.
That flooding went to Sandusky.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, our flooding was just the major, but later that, I heard that 120, 130 some bridges like this washed out in the whole state. And later that summer, I went canoeing on the Mohegan River, okay, which averages 18 inches deep, and it was like things are 20, 30 feet up in the trees because it overflooded just like this. So it was all over Ohio. And of course, this is the watershed.
Right.
We got it worse, yeah.
Any other questions?
I just wondered if anybody, one of the papers I turned in had an article, and I think it was from the Lorraine Journal, about somebody being rescued that they were on their boat, and when it went under the bridge, it knocked them out. And then they were
That was George Phillips and John Maiden and Peter Goodspeed rescued a person that, a woman that broke her back, I believe, and hit the bridge. Yeah, they saved her life. Well, Peter Goodspeed's going to come to our party on July 7th, and he's going to tell that story because he knows more about it. But I think she's okay. I really don't know. George and John Maiden are both deceased, so Peter's going to come and talk. Yes.
My dad was at Vermilion Powerboat on Red Fussner, and he took the tractor down as the water was rising and put the bucket out so he could help people out of their boats and get across the rising water to the higher ground.
Wow. Anyone else? Yes, way back there.
How long did it take them to, I wasn't up for yet, about 2 weeks later I came
Took many years, I know that, but I don't even remember. It was a long time after it washed out. I don't know. We can find out, but I don't know. Yes, they spoke a month ago, the people from the Olympic Club. They spoke here a month ago, and they'll come again on July 7th. Just kind of like Riverside, I would say, off the, kind of the same thing, yeah. Yes, back there? Route 60. It's south of Birmingham. It's like that. There's a new bridge there now. Yeah. Close to West Road, yeah. Or on West Road. Anyone else? Yeah, I believe so. I mean, there was a lot of rain. I think there was, how many, does anybody remember? 17 inches of rain fell, yeah, in the river valley. And the dam overflowed in Wakeman, is that correct? It wasn't washed out. Yeah, yeah. As long as it doesn't rain that much.
The dam in Wakeman is actually a spillway.
Yes.
Buckeye Oil Company was allowed to put a wall across the river. They needed water for their processing. And so it's not really, it's a spillway, not really a dam. And water goes over all the time. So actually, some friends of ours, their family lived, their backyard down the hill is with the fiction, or not fictional, but the Wakeman Dam. But it's basically a spillway. Water goes over it all the time. So it's not designed to hold water back in case of high water. This water just goes over it. There's no floodgates or anything. It's just strictly a big masonry wall across the river. So.
These homes that some of which still exist, do they still live? Are they at that same site?
Some of them are, yeah, definitely, yes. But they've been raised up.
The new foundations?
New foundations and higher.
In many years, you raise a window and the mud just comes.
A few years ago, Eddie and Dolores were putting a new kitchen in, and their home right now was low during the flood, so it was flooded. But anyway, it's a very solid home. It's raised up now, and he was pulling the covers off, and I said, Eddie, don't clean that. There's a mud in the joy. That's collector mud.
Well, when Russ and I remodeled my parents' cottage a few years back, a few years ago, my husband and I remodeled my parents' cottage, and we took one wall out and expanded, and between the 2x4s, you could see the water level. It was all mud in the insulation. It was just, and then when we took the insulation out, there was dried mud. Like I said, it was like concrete. Between the 2x4s, on top of the studs, between the studs and the flooring, there was just mud everywhere. It was was the strangest thing. Russ says, well, now I know where the water level was.